What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is your boy Frankie Bones, and in today's video we are going to be breaking down the Major 4 Week 1 schedule. Coming up this weekend, we're finally returning back to action after a little bit of a break after the Major 3 tournament. Lots of news to discuss before we get to predictions, including some placements in Major 3, some big roster changes that may impact some teams as we head into the championship push, and also a little bit of a map change, a little bit of a wrinkle thrown into the dynamic that is the CDL. But before we get into it, just wanted to say thank you guys for all the support on the past few videos. Really appreciate it. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel for all new videos with everything pertaining to the CDL, as well as some occasional banger ranked play videos, and also have some MLB/Yankees content coming on the way. Today's opening day. Recording this today on Thursday. Apologize for a little bit of a late upload, but a little bit of chaos going on in the studio, aka the basement, having some work done. So appreciate you guys hanging out with me here with the late night upload. But without further ado, let's hop into the video. So the first thing that we'll talk about is a quick wrap up of Major 3. If you guys did not watch, the Toronto Ultra ended up coming out victorious, lifting the trophy with Scrappy being named the MVP. He was pretty dominant throughout the entire major tournament and was very well earned. This team looked really good and ultimately took advantage of some great situations for them. Some other big storylines is OpTic Texas. After a relatively shocking 3-0 loss in winners round 1 to the Boston Breach, they make a really miraculous comeback, make a massive run through the losers bracket, and end up placing second, and arguably could have won their home major once again. They ended up losing to Boston, like I said, and winning some key matchups. They were able to take care of business against a team like the Ravens, a little bit sketchy, but that's when they really picked up momentum. They 3-1 the Mutineers. They 3-1 Seattle Surge, who's playing really well. They get Boston Breach again in losers round 4 on Championship Sunday. They win that. They beat the Atlanta Phase 3-1 to make it to the final. This team looks to be in really good form as we push towards championship sort of talks here as we're in Major 4. We just have Major 4, Major 5, and Champs. So they're in a really good spot, and they're starting to really flow with Dan Ghosty on their team and really just hitting form, I would say, overall. Control looked much better, so definitely good signs for OpTic. A couple of other notes that I want to touch on here with Major 3. Atlanta FaZe looked a little bit vulnerable. They ended up losing a search and destroy in the end to Toronto Ultra, which is pretty interesting, but obviously still an incredibly strong game mode. The hard points for them still a little bit weird, so we'll see how they're able to bounce back. Again, another top 3 placing for them, so nothing too concerning, but there are definitely chinks in the armor here that people can see and other teams have noticed and been able to take advantage of over the past few tournaments. A couple other placements I want to highlight. Boston with a top 4. Again, they played really well. Beans, with a new addition to their team, played very well, and I like the chemistry going on there. So definitely like to see what they want to do in terms of Major 4 and onward. Vegas gets an incredibly important placing in top 6. They had one of the greatest comebacks of all time in Hardpoint on Hotel against LAT. Their team looked like they were playing really well. Some of their guys are really starting to step up. We see Donnie Temp bring out some of those slang tendencies that we've seen in the past. We'll talk about them a little bit later as well. LAT with a top 8. They end up going down to the Vegas Legion and 3-1 in losers round 2. I'd like to just chalk it up to being a little bit inconsistent for them. They are a little bit of more of a late game team. Obviously, they got top 2 at Major 2, but really not too concerned about this team overall. Still a really talented roster. NYSL gets top 12. I think this is really alarming. Personally, they haven't really looked as good as they ever looked in Major 1. Lots of the league just sort of catching up to them in terms of game knowledge and gameplay standpoint. They lose 3-1 to the Mutineers, who they definitely should be able to beat, or we thought that they should definitely be able to beat up to this point. So, interesting to see what we see from them in Major 4. Obviously, again, they have a very talented team. They won Major 1, but definitely some question marks for them as we continue on throughout the season. And the last thing, Minnesota with another top 12, or not another top 12, but another loss rather. They go 0-6 in Stage 3. Really just not ideal. Again, we'll talk about them in just a minute here. And we'll transition over to some of the roster changes that occurred leading up to Major 4. So the first one we'll talk about is the Minnesota Rocker. They made a change to bring in Fame off of the Rocker Academy team, who's been playing incredibly well, best team in NA Challengers at the moment. They bring in Fame, and they end up sending Attach to the bench. Really an interesting move, in my opinion. The chemistry on this team was a little bit off, which Attach has talked about on stream, but ultimately, I'm just not sure exactly if this is the right move for this team. I was personally thinking that maybe this move would be made for somebody like Cammy, who's really had a difficult time in this title, sort of consistently hitting form. But ultimately, in the press conference with their coaches, it sort of seemed like they were trying to unlock Cammy and Bance as well, making him more comfortable on the map. So we'll have to see what sort of happens with this roster and how they're able to perform in Major 4. Attach goes on a tweet, I'm pulling it up here, just that he's going to be obviously on the bench for this team going forward and wants to continue to compete. Really difficult spot for Dylan because he is on a rather large contract. We haven't really seen any teams willing to put up the money to buy out a player, much less somebody on a relatively large contract compared to some of the other players. So most likely he'll end up being either on the bench for the Minnesota Rocker or potentially, if they make another change, to bring him back into the starting lineup. But most likely he will be staying with the Rocker for the rest of the season. The next move we'll talk about is the Vegas Legion. Bringing in Standy, he will be replacing Turiel on their roster. Recently he was released by the Toronto Ultra, no longer being a sub of the team, and we definitely saw a little bit of back and forth between Standy and some other members of the Toronto Ultra team, like Scrappy. Definitely not the best sort of ending to his time in Toronto. So we'll see if he's able to come back with some fire. I do believe that they do play each other in this major qualifying cycle for Major 4. So definitely interested in seeing what Standy is going to be able to bring to this squad. A lot of slang for sure. He'll be replacing Turiel, which I think was the right move, keeping TJ on for that S&D prowess. Makes a lot of sense because that is Vegas's sort of bread and butter game mode. And if they're able to get better in some of the respawns, I think they have a real chance to push for champs. The last change that we'll talk about, I wouldn't say it's super notable just because I think that London is in a pretty difficult spot to be able to make that push for top 8. But they end up bringing in Yuli for Paul X. Paul X never really fit on this team, in my opinion. Definitely more of a flex player, which was initially his role on the team. But ultimately, him and Nasty had a role switch to where Nasty was running the second AR alongside of Scraps. And his numbers looked a lot better. This move made a lot of sense for London because Yuli is a true sub. Somebody to pair with ASIM and really have that sub presence on the map, which is super important on some of these different maps. And they have been sort of right at the door with some of these matches that they have. They just don't really have that clutch factor in a way. Obviously, they brought OpTic to a Game 5 and arguably should have won that series, but I think it's a good move, but I think it might be a little bit too late for this London team, just sort of based on their standings in the rest of the league. Next thing we'll talk about is the new map being added to the CDL rotation. This comes by way of Expo Control. This will be replacing Fortress Control. Obviously, we saw a lot of terrible things with Fortress Control. Obviously, it's incredibly difficult to win on offense on this map. Some say unwinnable. And at the end of the day, I think I saw a stat before. that it had about a 19.4%, 19-20% win rate on offense, and that's just kind of anemic. You really can't have a map like that in the map set. It was terrible to watch. We saw in the major teams just playing in the back spawn, knowing their upticks, which obviously is just how the game works, and it makes sense, strategically, but it just looks awful. It's always 5 defenses in a row, and I'm just really a proponent of this change. Some of the pros were really hesitant at first. They had to vote on this map twice as to whether or not to bring it into the map pool, but I think it is the right decision. There's lots of cuts over towards the theater side. A is really wide open on the pool side. Spawns might be a little bit questionable, but ultimately I think that this will be better for the league overall. There's still plenty of time before champs. I think that some of the reasons players didn't want this in the game is they'll have to learn a new map, learn new callouts, new spawns, and ultimately get reps on the map. Not sure if it's just laziness or teams just really being quote-unquote good at fortress control. I think it's rather difficult to be good at fortress control. Definitely some teams are better in terms of converting on offense and getting ticks on offense, but overall I think this is a major W for the scene. And also, I'm just glad that we're able to sort of fix the map ratio on ranked play, because it was pretty jaunty there for a minute. There will not be Expo S&D, and all the S&D maps will stay as they are. So no risk of losing Mercado or Fortress in S&D for the moment. The next thing that I want to talk about is the current CDL point standings as they sit. And in my opinion, I think that these top 7 teams are really locked into their spots in terms of having a spot in champs. So the top 7 from top to bottom in order go Atlanta FaZe, Ultra, OpTic Texas, NYSL, LAT, Boston Breach, and the Seattle Surge. Now obviously Minnesota has really been struggling over the past major and Major 3 going 0-6. So this is a real opportunity for some of the teams at the bottom to make a push and have an opportunity to lock in that 8th spot. Again, we talked about Vegas getting a top 6 placing at Major 3. And I think with the addition of Standy, they're primed and ready to make a push for that 8th spot. Obviously, the Rocker bring in Fame as a roster change. Definitely sensing that there's a real opportunity for them to be able to make champs despite such a bad major. So we'll have to see what ends up happening in the end. I'm not sure if LAG is really going to have enough steam come the end of the season. They have looked good in flashes individually, but as a team, they've had difficulty sort of putting everything together and converting in matches, particularly online. They really had Hardpoint as a backbone, and for now, that mode just really has fallen off for them overall. So we'll see what ends up happening. I really don't think Florida or London will make too much of a push here. I do like the roster changes by both teams, but I think at the deficit that they're at, it might just be difficult again with LAG as well. Vegas with a 20-point lead over both of those teams, and London, way down, I think is going to be difficult for them as well. So now we'll talk about this graphic that I'm bringing up on screen here. This is the Major 4 schedule for the matches that these teams are going to be playing. Sort of a strength of schedule graphic. If you can see the green, the variations of green are obviously indications of games that they should win, and gray, sort of dark gray color, indicates a loss. So from top to bottom, you can see some of the teams that have more favorable matchups in terms of what their placing may look like at the Major 4 tournament. Toronto, New York, LAT, and OpTic all sort of look like they have pretty favorable matchups, particularly the top 3 teams. And then towards the bottom, Vegas, LAG, and Florida. These are some of the bottom teams, obviously, when you go down on the list, because these are based on win probability and sort of the opportunity to win games. So obviously that sort of makes some sense. But definitely some important teams towards the bottom with more difficult schedules that they will have to try and figure out ways to stack some wins, potentially try and get into the winner's bracket and get some much important points as we head towards champs after Major 5. Now we'll move on to the schedule for this upcoming weekend. Matches will start again on Friday. So we'll run through these matches pretty quick. Won't keep you guys too long with this segment. But on Friday, starting at 3 o'clock, we have Boston versus the Vegas Legion. In that particular matchup, I have Boston in a 3-1. The next match, we have LAT versus London. I have LAT in a 3-0. I think they come back strong here in this major qualifying cycle. And to round out the matches on Friday, we have the Atlanta FaZe going up against the New York Subliners. Traditionally would be more of a banger series, but I have Atlanta FaZe rather taking this in a 3-1 fashion. Moving on to the 4 matches on Saturday. Starting us off, Minnesota will actually be hosting somewhat of a home series type of event. They'll be playing twice here on Saturday, which is pretty interesting. And I think really cool. They're going to have fans at the event. I believe that they're going to be in Madison, Wisconsin, which is really cool to have some fans and supporters there in person. Their first matchup will be at 3 o'clock versus the Florida Mutineers. I have Minnesota winning this one 3-2. I think there's a little bit of a honeymoon period for them in terms of this new roster. The second match, we have Boston versus Toronto. I have Toronto 3-1. The third matchup, we have LAG versus the Minnesota Rocker. I'll take Minnesota winning both of these in front of the crowd. I think, again, the honeymoon period will be able to help out. And I think LAG, again, sort of just running out of steam here towards the end of the season. So I'll take that one, Minnesota 3-1. And to round out the matches on Saturday, we have LAT going up against the Seattle Surge. And I'll give this one to Seattle in a 3-2. Seattle's form has looked a lot better. I think they just need to become more consistent outside of Pred. And I think they're really going to look to establish this in this next major. Finally, for our matches on Sunday, for the first match, we have the Toronto Ultra going up against Seattle. I'll give this one Toronto 3-2. For the next matchup, we have the London Royal Ravens going up against OpTic Texas. I'll give this to the boys of the Green Wall in a 3-0 fashion. And to round out the weekend, the Florida Mutineers versus the Atlanta FaZe. I'll give this one 3-0 to the FaZe. And finally, to wrap up this video, going to pull up a graphic of my team for the Major 4 Breaking Point Fantasy team. They have a new feature that's been added, which is the captain feature. Essentially, you will select your captain, and that player will get 10% more points, 1.1 points, 1.1 times points, essentially. So as you can see here, indicated in the yellow or gold, I have Celium selected as my captain. I have Draza as well from LAT. Going back to the well with Boston, I am taking Vivid at $5. I think that's a steal. And as well, I'll take Donnie Temp at 5. He looked really strong at the major. And I think the change with Standy, with that addition of more slaying power, will really help overall the team chemistry and really open up the map for these ARs. So I think Temp and Clay will both benefit here, but I'm going to go with Donnie Temp for $5. And ultimately, have to just go high with one of your players. I'm feeling like sort of went, in the $8 range, $7 range with some of my top end players, but I think it's really important to just get a $10, $9 player, and especially with the captain, I think getting a great player at $9 could be beneficial. Sort of get a steal for an extra dollar, be able to add that in on the back end with one of my players. But let me know what you guys think of my team. I think maybe I will get a winner this time around. I got another top 25% placing last time, so that will be back-to-back top 25% for your boy. But obviously that's not going to do it, not going to get me in the bread. So we'll see what we have in store from these players for my new roster. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. Appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video if you guys are listening to me. Again, appreciate all the support. If you guys are still here, make sure to leave a like and comment down below what you guys think of all these roster moves, what you think about Expo Search and Destroy, and what you think about my predictions for this upcoming weekend. But for now, that's going to do it, guys. This has been your boy Frankie Bones, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Peace out.